Okay, welcome back. Hope you've had a good cup of renewable energy incorporating. We are up for our last part of the day. And we will be addressing now in the next hour, or next 1.5 hours, an important subject which we have addressed in previous sessions as well, and where the F20 platform in collaboration with REI has had a so-called philanthropy forum yesterday. And that's about responsible investment. That's about the untapped potential of investments into sustainable technologies, into sustainability, basically, which is called impact investment. And I'd like to welcome at the panel Ms. Fiona Reynolds, which is the CEO of the Principle for Responsible Investors. And the PRI is probably the biggest network existing for guiding investors for responsible investment. And as you know, investments really require a demand in the supply side. So how can we actually disclose sustainable investments and responsible investment? I'm much looking forward to your intervention. Fiona, you've got the floor. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to speak. I found the whole day really fascinating, and have really enjoyed the discussion. So today, what I want to cover is the role that investors have to play in the transition to a low-carbon economy, because in my view, while there's many players in this area, the transition cannot happen without the investment community. The investment community can't do it on its own, but we definitely can't have the transition without the investment community. So I want to talk a little bit about how investors themselves are thinking about climate change and some of the work that investors are doing. But first of all, for those of you not familiar with the organisation, just an update on who the PRI represents, if I can get this slide to change. So the PRI is a investor network, and we have 2,400 signatories that have signed up to our 6 principles, and we operate in 50 countries. In Japan, we've got 76 signatories, and since 2015 here in Japan, we've been delighted to have GPIF as one of our signatories. They're the biggest pension fund in the world, and have Hiro Mizuno, who's their CEO, as a member of the PRI board. And we continue to add signatories at a rapid rate. So in the last year, we've added 350 net new signatories, so almost a new signatory a day. And I mention that only because I think if you look at the number of signatories we have, the investors involved in our network, they're the organisations that are most likely to contribute to the transition to a low-carbon economy and to the SDGs. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about what we're looking towards the G20 leaders to act upon here in Japan throughout 2019 and also into 2020. And we've been fortunate to be able to be involved in some of the G20 side meetings and discussions. So investor awareness of the IPC special report published last year is growing, with investors obviously very concerned at the urgency of climate change. And at the PRI, we recognise that there is a climate emergency. The IPCC report highlights really the significance for investors about the difference of the temperature rises between 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees, and shows us that emissions need to decline by 45% before 2030, with renewable energy needing to supply 70 to 80% of power by 2050. So for global investors, this means a transformation of the energy system that's reaching across sectors, so including energy, transport, buildings, infrastructure, and across all the asset classes that we invest in, including infrastructure and property. So for investors, there's no way for them to get away from climate change. It's something that's economy-wide, and investors are invested in the whole economy. So following on from the IPCC report, global investors are calling on G20 leaders to take action to limit heating to 1.5 degrees and to urgently increase action across all sectors. Specifically, investors with over 34 trillion in assets under management have written to the G20, we've just done this, and we've asked them to prioritise strengthening their NDC commitments and increasing their ambition. We've asked them to phase out fossil fuel subsidies and thermal coal. We've asked them and talked about the need for carbon pricing at the right price, a price that will make a difference. We've asked for climate disclosure in line with the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD, and to ensure that plans are in place for a just transition for workers and communities impacted by the energy transition. It's also important, however, that investors aren't just asking governments to act and others to act, that they're also doing things themselves. And investors are acting. I would say that there's a small group of leaders and a large tail, but you need that leadership and you need some acting first. So a couple of examples. So today, PRI signatories report that they've got more than $1 trillion invested in low carbon investments. A couple of examples include New York State Common Retirement Fund, which has allocated $10 billion in sustainable investments, including in low carbon indices, but they're looking at how they'll move beyond indices. CBUS, which is a large Australian pension fund, has recently set a net zero target for its entire property portfolio, which it has a large property portfolio, by 2030. The green bond market has also seen significant increase year on year, including in emerging markets, and the climate-aligned bond universe is now over $1.45 trillion US. However, low carbon investment and green bond investments today, even though those figures sound large, they still remain a very small part of the total market, and much more is needed from the investment community if we're going to reach the 1.5 degree challenge. So the PRI is really working to mobilise private sources of climate finance, focusing on supporting institutional investors in making the low carbon transition, making low carbon investments across asset classes, and through collaboration with government. And a few examples of this: we've published guidance for investors on how to invest in the low carbon economy, which covers the investment strategies that are available to them, practical case studies, taxonomies that can be used, as well as covering strategies for phasing out of thermal coal power. As an example of the work that we do with governments, which is really important because governments send important signals to the market and important signals to investors. The PRI is leading as rapporteur on the technical expert group appointed by the European Commission to develop a taxonomy for sustainable financial activities, which will be published later this month, and it's already been mentioned a number of times throughout this conference. The taxonomy really aims to support investors in scaling up sustainable investments in the EU, including in low carbon. And PRI also assists in market capacity building in markets. We've particularly been working in China on green finance, including in collaboration with policymakers. And I saw Dr. Ma Zhong was here earlier, and we've certainly worked with him and many others in China. Investors also want companies to step up their efforts in addressing climate change. So over 300 investors, representing 32 trillion in assets under management, have come together in a coalition that's called Climate Action 100+. And what we're doing is we're pressing the companies that we are shareholders of to take action on climate change. And we're focused on the largest 100 emitting companies in the world. So we're asking them to set a greenhouse gas reduction target that's measurable. We're asking them to disclose in line with the TCFD, and we're asking them about the governance of their organisations. So what's their board doing? How are they thinking about climate change? Do they have the right people in place? Is the board asking the right questions? Do they have the right skills? And this is the biggest ever investor engagement to corporations that's ever taken place in the world. So I think it shows that investors are concerned, and one of the ways that they can help emissions reductions is by working with the companies that they own. And we've already had some early successes. So we've seen commitments from very large companies like Glencore, Equinor, Royal Dutch Shell and BP. Companies have committed to set targets for emission reductions in line with the Paris Agreement. As we all know, the globe's current emissions trajectory is dangerously off track, and the longer that it's left to drift, the greater the policy risk for investors, as governments may look to suddenly catch up on the objectives of the Paris Agreement. In other words, simply, the longer that the delay in policy action, the more forceful and urgent it will need to be, the actions that they bring in place. And for us, we believe that these policy actions will happen in the next 6 years and that they'll have extreme impacts on the global economy. So investors have to be concerned in things that happen across the economy. So last year we produced a thought leadership paper for investors that we titled The Inevitable Policy Response, or IPR, setting out our views on how we believe a policy jolt will play out and how it will likely impact investors. Our simple argument is that if the client science is right, and we believe that it is, then a failure to reach the temperature of 1.5 degrees simply is so disruptive to societies and to the global economy that some policy response will indeed be inevitable, and that the longer action is delayed, the more intervention is required. So we believe that to ensure that we don't have to have a lot of intervention in the system, that we're asking the G20 within our research papers to first of all step up a steep rise in carbon prices and border tax adjustments to spread carbon pricing across the globe. Secondly, that given falling costs of technology, regulation and performance standards are needed to change behaviour and to encourage energy efficiency. And we've heard today that energy efficiency is just as important as renewable energy. We need to incentivise clean technologies and energy to enable decarbonisation, and we need to encourage nature-based solutions, negative emissions technologies, and obviously dietary changes. But we also need a just transition. And so the PRI is building a lot of economic models for investors so that they're able to consider the implications of the policy responses that we think need to be put in place to address climate change against their portfolios, because you really need to understand portfolio-wide how this is going to impact you. And it's not simple. In turn, I just want to quickly touch on the TCFD, because climate disclosure is really a key priority for investors, particularly the implementation of the recommendations of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. Financial markets really do have the potential to improve our prospects for tackling climate change, but only if we make climate risks and opportunities more transparent. And this is the reasoning behind the TCFD. And it's a framework that's been developed by the financial markets for the financial industry. And it is one that will, over time, translate information about climate change into financial metrics. It's also a flexible framework that recognises that investors have all different starting points. And we're really encouraging companies and investors to implement the task force recommendations. And the areas of the task force framework cover governance, strategy, risk management, metrics and targets. And just a few days ago here in Japan, we had a TCFD working session. We had 400 organisations register for it, both companies and investors. It was fantastic to see the support. And Japan has also announced a TCFD consortium. Nearly 170 companies and investors in Japan have committed to the TCFD, which is fantastic. And just to finish, another vital issue for investors are really to connect the social implications of the low carbon transition with the environmental ones. We can't just think about the environmental issues on their own without thinking about the social issues. The transition to a low carbon economy, of course, will mean that many communities and workers will be impacted and jobs in the fossil fuel sector will decrease. But in our view, workers around the world cannot be the ones who end up paying the ultimate price for climate change. And we need to make sure that there's a strategy for these workers and these communities. So we talk a lot in the investment community about stranded assets. But when we do this, we always talk about physical assets. But people are assets as well, and they can be stranded. And we need to consider them when we're talking as investors about the transition. So a just transition for us is one that is an approach that seeks to revitalise industrial communities affected by the low carbon transition through place-based investing and strategic dialogue with companies, with policymakers and with investors. And we've launched some research on the just transition. We're encouraging investors to incorporate it. We had 126 large investors who represent $6 trillion in assets under management who have now committed to incorporate the just transition into their investment process, which is amazing. We're also supportive of revenue from carbon pricing, enabling the just transition, and that's been talked about as well. So just in summary, our perspective is that global leaders need to act with urgency on climate change. I support the comments that have been made that it's not just about words and it's not just about saying we're going to do things, it's about action. We of course commend the UK government's announcement to commit to a net zero by 2050 target. I live in London and I'm very proud of the UK government, I have to say. So investors are looking for G20 countries to really step up and also make these commitments and also take action. We just want them to step up their commitments to the NDCs, make sure that they've got more ambition, to end fossil fuel subsidies, to ensure a thermal coal phase out, to introduce carbon pricing and also to incorporate a just transition. So in our view, for the investment community, just finally, 10 years ago, there was the global financial crisis. And I always say to investors that unlike the global financial crisis, that investors are not going to be able to say about the climate crisis that they didn't know about it, that they didn't get warning, that they couldn't see it coming, and they couldn't do anything about it. Because it's not warning that we lack, it's action that we lack. So we all need to do our role, and investors have a key role to play. But thank you, and I really appreciate the work that the F20's been doing. I know the work that philanthropists and I know that the work that foundations are doing has been really important to us, and in many cases it's assisted us with some of our research projects and some of the work that we've been able to then take to investors to try to encourage them to take more action. So thank you, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you very, very much for these points. And I think yesterday in the discussion, as I said in the beginning, responsible investment or sustainable investment is really key for the energy transition that we're discussing. And the better the guidance is for and the quality control for a sustainable investment, the more sustainable investment will be there. So I think I cannot stress enough the importance of your work, Fiona, and of things like initiatives like the Climate Action 100+ initiative or an institutional investors guide indeed. So I think this is really key. We have touched upon the significance of cities and urban areas in particular, and Onu-san already mentioned that we have Tsuyoshi Yamamoto with us today. He is the special advisor to the Governor on International Affairs of the Tokyo Metropolitan Government. Tsuyoshi, please join us on stage. With your career as a diplomat and a key advisor for the government, I'm sure you have some very important insights to share with us, in particular with regard to the voice of the metropolitan areas and the cities in the context of the G20. So the floor is yours.
皆さんこんにちは。
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I am Yamamoto, responsible for being a special advisor to the governor on international affairs. At this high-level forum, I would like to give you a report on the U20 Tokyo Mayor's Summit that was held last month. It is a great honor to be given this opportunity. Many of you in the room are probably not familiar with Urban 20. Now, Urban 20. The mayor of Buenos Aires and the mayor of Paris have called upon other cities, and it was held in 2012 it is the newest engagement group with the 32 cities that are members of G20 are the main participating cities. The urban cities are a hub of innovation and consumption, and it is also a main source of global warming greenhouse gases. In order to address global issues, U20 is a very important player. If I may rephrase it, at local level, we need to have a policy in place. Otherwise, it is impossible to achieve the target of Paris Agreement. This is a common understanding of us participating in Urban 20. And with this in mind, we've set up a new platform at U20, and things like climate change and also other global issues are to be discussed in this platform. And through Urban 20, we listen to the voices of urban cities and experiences, and so that will reach the heads of states that take part in G20. In order to build an inclusive society, we would like to collaborate with G20 leadership. Urban 20 Tokyo Summit, Mayor's Summit, started from the evening of the 20th of May until the morning of the 22nd. So it was held for a day and a half, effectively. 26 cities, including 7 observer cities, took part. 8 mayors and many mayor-level participants took part in the summit. And this, I think, is reflective of the commitment of many cities around the world and has helped to enhance the profile of Urban 20. The participants of Summit is, as you see on the slide, were involved in 6 sessions, including climate action, circular economy, social inclusion, among others, and solutions to address challenges have been shared, and we also had an opportunity to share various lessons learned. And these discussions were put together, and in the morning of the 22nd, we announced the Urban 20 Tokyo Mayor Summit communique with signatures of 30 cities, including observers. On the 22nd, in the afternoon, Governor Koike, together with other members of the Tokyo Summit from 5 cities, we had an opportunity to meet with Prime Minister Abe to provide to submit the communique directly to the Prime Minister. There are many commonalities in terms of challenges and issues faced across different cities, and G20 Osaka, climate change and marine plastics are taken up as topics, and also the substance of the communique, the Prime Minister said, will be taken up as a feed for thought to be discussed at the Osaka summit. These are some of the main topics that were taken up as priority agenda. Office building focus, cap and trade has been introduced in Tokyo. Quite advanced climate change countermeasures have been put in place in Tokyo. And through these countermeasures, we take pride in taking leadership in implementing climate action. While economy is growing, energy consumption is declining, and therefore decoupling of energy consumption and economic growth has been achieved. In the meantime, there's a increase in natural disasters in many parts of the world, and therefore the urgency of taking countermeasure is quite apparent. We need to protect the lives and assets of citizens, and to contribute to decarbonization, we need to take another further few steps. And based on this perception, the Tokyo Metropolitan Government, in hosting the Urban 20 Tokyo Summit, as presented in the latest IPCC scenario of 1.5 degrees in 2050, carbon neutral city is to be achieved by 2050. This has been set up as a new target, and at the Urban 20, in order to achieve decarbonization, we've led the discussion so that we can come up with very ambitious goals. As a result, as you can see at the very top of the slide, in the communique of Urban 20, by 2050, greenhouse gas CO2 emission to be effectively reduced to zero. This was to be called upon the G20 leadership. And also by 2050, renewable energy of power will be achieving 100%, and also promoting decarbonization of buildings by 2050. And through effective use of resources, we have also talked about promoting SDRs and also recycling plastic that is difficult to recycle to be reduced in a phased manner, and to reduce plastic waste in a phased out manner. This is the final slide. Climate action discussion at the Urban Summit. This is a snapshot of that. From Rome, Jakarta, and Tokyo Metropolitan Government took part in this meeting, talking about decarbonization challenges the world is facing. For example, how we can move from passenger vehicles to public transportation, and the public transportation itself, how could that be greened? And how could we involve children and also women, especially housewives, mobilize them in the climate change action? There was a very heated discussion, vibrant discussion. And through the announcement of the communique that I talked about earlier, we shared the potential that cities could have in climate change action. I think we were able to play a part in that. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much for this. And it's great to see how the U20 has matured only in a very short period of time. Last year at our F20 summit in Buenos Aires, we also welcomed the representative of U20. And on a personal note, I of course like also the fact that some German cities are engaged in the U20, including the city where I live in Hamburg. So that's quite encouraging. Thank you very much. The U20 is one stakeholder group to the G20. F20 is another stakeholder group to the G20. But many of you know that there are a number of other stakeholder groups as well. And that's a good thing. That's actually a very good thing, because we can ensure that at least in the process towards the G20 political development, we have different perspectives on the table. And somebody who is one of the key figures among the civil 20, the civil society organizations contributing to the G20 process, is Enrique Mortua Constantinidis. Enrique, please join the stage. He will run us through another great panel sharing the perspectives of the different stakeholder groups to the G20. So thanks for being with us, and good luck with the panel.
Thank you very much, Stefan, for the introduction. I've been honored to host this panel. As we all know, we've been talking about what it's needed to do during the day. We have been talking the important issues, the substance, and what's going on, and what do we have in front of us, the challenges and the opportunities. Now, let's just go a little bit more into what do we do? What other stakeholders? Anna today was talking about engaging more stakeholders, about including more people. Tasneem was talking about the just transition that is not done by specialists. It has to include others. It has to include more people here. So we just have seen what investors are doing, what cities are doing. And in this panel, I would like to call on Catherine Brown from the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation in Australia. Please join. Sang Lee, Secretary General for the Society for Entrepreneurs and Ecology Foundation. Country Lee Hongpen, Country Director, China Director of the Climate Change Children Investment Fund Foundation. Hideki Wakabayashi from the Civil 20. And Renato Redento Constantino from the F20 as the Executive Director. So thanks for joining today. I would like to give you a few minutes for each of you to address these two main things. What is the role of the constituencies that we have here? And what are the expectations that we have for this G20? These are two things that are key that we would hopefully go through a really good variety. We'll have here people working closely with vulnerable governments, people working with civil society organizations, people in the philanthropy. So I would like to start with Catherine, if I may. Please, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm going to speak as a community foundation, which is a particular type of foundation that I will explain, but I think has a particularly relevant role in a just transition. So I'd like to thank you for the invitation to participate in the panel. And it's wonderful to be a member of F20 and to be sharing ideas with all the members and with the guests. So I was asked to describe what we do and why, and also talk about the role of foundations in a climate transition. So first of all, our foundation, the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation, we're Australia's oldest and largest community foundation. And we were established by Lord Mayor John Swanson in 1923. So we're 96 years old, but we like to think we're still contemporary even though we're 96. So, so our corpus, and this is really important, our corpus has been donated by many donors and bequestors. So we're not a private foundation set up by one person or one family. So that gives us a different perspective. So our mission is really to tackle the big issues of the day facing Melbourne. And at the moment, these are climate resilience and also homelessness. So they're the two big focus areas. And we use what we call the philanthropy toolbox in our work. So while we make grants to not-for-profits, we also commission research and we catalyse initiatives and we support community education and we do some impact investment. So the idea is to use all our capability. And our mission at a high level is for a resilient and inclusive Melbourne. We often go in very early on projects, so we're often the first funder, and we are committed to supporting innovation, including in the climate challenge area. We're working on 13 of the SDGs. In our work, we focus on place, so our home is Melbourne, particularly on overcoming disadvantage in our city and on engaging our community. I'll highlight a few projects in a moment to give you a better idea of what we're working on, but I just wanted to talk about why it is important that foundations have a voice in the climate transition and perhaps, another stakeholder through F20. So philanthropy can help the community rapidly reduce emissions, adapt to a changing climate, and equitably adjust as the economy transitions. We bring a lens of overcoming disadvantage to all our work. And without this lens, it's possible that vulnerable groups, such as older people and low-income households, could be at risk in the transition. We bring a direct connection to our grant and collaboration partners in the not-for-profit sector, and we can help scale new approaches. So we often pilot or test an idea and then help them scale, and then sometimes government will take projects on. We're essentially the source of innovation capital for the not-for-profit sector, and as I've said, we can test solutions and new models. We have a risk appetite where we might be able to take on a risk that business or government can't take, but once something's been demonstrated, then they can come in. We have a very long time horizon because obviously we're 96 years old, but most foundations have a long time horizon. And sometimes we stay developing knowledge and collaborations on an issue for, 10 plus years. We often support the translation of research into practice. I think we've heard that a few times today. So, and we are sort of, we're network builders and we can connect different sectors. So going back to our work, particularly in the climate challenge, first of all, I wanted to talk about place. So one of the projects that we're most proud of, I guess, or most committed to, is called the Foodprint Project, which we have worked on with the University of Melbourne and Sustain, which is our local sustainable food network, for 5 years. Foodprint has mapped Melbourne's food bowl. So we've celebrated our potential to provide 82% of our fruit and vegetable needs within Greater Melbourne and the peri-urban fringe. But we've also, through this, identified the biggest risks and stressors, particularly in the context of a changing climate. So for us, big issues are the overdevelopment of valuable agricultural land on the city's fringe and the need to drought-proof our food bowl, and the potential to reuse water from water treatment plants in urban agriculture. It probably need to explain that we're the fastest growing city, I think maybe even in the world, just incredibly fast, and we're going to be the largest city in Australia in about 2 years. So we're overtaking Sydney, so we've got a lot of issues. So the roadmap, which the Foodprint Project has just released, and you can find them if you just look up Foodprint Melbourne, you'll find all their reports, is a roadmap for a resilient and sustainable Melbourne food bowl, and it highlights farmland protection, water access, nutrient recycling and sustainable farming. So the Foodprint Project is incredibly successful in the sense that it's been downloaded more than 1,000 times and used so extensively by policymakers, and is now likely to be replicated in other cities. So, for example, Brisbane is looking at it. So we're just discussing the next steps, and I think we're going to look at a feasibility study for circular food systems in Melbourne. So again, looking through the place lens, another project that we've actually initiated is called the Hotspots Initiative. So this project is focusing on building resilience to natural disasters, particularly heat waves. In Australia, 9 of the 10 hottest years on record occurred since 2005. January 2019 was Australia's hottest ever January, which followed the hottest December in 2018. And in January, we had the highest minimum, the highest maximum, the highest mean temperatures. And at one point in January, the 15 hottest places on Earth were all in Australia. I could go on, it's quite serious as you can see. The 2 most extreme heat waves on record have both occurred in the last 10 years. So in this context, we saw a serious gap in relation to managing heat waves and other disaster preparedness. And so we wanted to pilot an approach to building community resilience through really inviting proposals from particular areas. So we're working with Emergency Management Victoria, which is a government entity, and the Victorian Council of Social Services, and local community and health organisations. We first of all applied Monash University's Heat Vulnerability Index for Melbourne, which identified suburbs which were the most vulnerable during heat waves, so they're the hottest suburbs. And then we overlaid this with data on socioeconomic disadvantage, especially areas with high levels of older residents who are particularly at risk. And so we identified 3 sites, and we've now funded Brimbank, Dandenong and soon Inner Melbourne in public housing, particularly in a public housing site. And we're going to also fund the evaluation of this project because we think it will have very useful elements for other people to use, and we will be expanding it into other hotspot sites in the coming year. In terms of overcoming disadvantage, we think a lot about vulnerable communities and how they're being part of the energy transition. So while Australia has serious work to do on reducing our emissions, we actually have a lot of action at the city level, as people have spoken about, and business. The community is also stepping up. So 2 million households have rooftop solar in Australia. There's a very big commitment. And we wanted to help not-for-profit organisations and low-income households be part of this movement. So we started a project with Renew, which is a not-for-profit alternative energy advisory organisation, and they piloted 9 sites owned by not-for-profit organisations. They undertook energy audits, and it led to people installing solar panels, solar hot water services, or removing incredibly inefficient appliances like huge fridges with one jug of milk in a disability service. So a lot of practical things. That project then grew to 50 sites, and now we're working directly with some peak bodies so that we can reach more low-income households. And just a couple, we've got a partnership with Community Housing Industry Association, and we are now rolling out energy efficient audits using an online tool to 200 sites owned by Aboriginal Housing Victoria. So we're working, that's just growing and snowballing, that project. But it's great, it's a niche that we can help fill. So these organisations and their tenants are all reducing carbon emissions, but also saving on electricity costs, which is a double benefit. So in relation to our programs generally as a foundation, I was able to attend COP21 as part of a Climate Funders initiative hosted by the European Climate Foundation and the Environment Grantmakers Association. We were briefed on all the aspects of the climate challenge, and it became very clear to me that this is not an environmental problem, this is a whole economy and whole community problem. So when I came back, we did some strategic thinking, and we basically apply a climate lens across all our work. So if we're working in housing, we think about sustainable, affordable housing. We think about where projects are located. Are they near services and public transport? And we won't fund them unless they are. And when we're looking at unemployment of young people, we look at projects that might encourage jobs in the new economy, such as green plumbing. And we added the health impact of climate change to our work, and I've talked about hotspots, that's an example. In terms of community education, we've also funded quite a few projects relating to educating the community with using science. I'll speed up. One is the Monash Climate Change Research Communications Hub, which means that 2.5 million people are now receiving evidence-based climate information from a trusted source, and it goes through the ABC News weather report and the Channel 7 weather report. So that's been quite exciting. They use data from the Bureau of Meteorology and CSIRO and so on to provide trend data on temperatures and rainfall that otherwise the community would not easily access. We've also supported ClimateWorks Australia to do the Generation Yes platform and the Cities Power Partnership. I don't want to go on, I've nearly finished. In terms of impact investment, we have one in relation to food waste, so diverting food that would otherwise go to waste, which is a digital platform. So in conclusion, I just want to note that there are more than 1,000 community foundations all around the world working in their cities and their regions. And we can build a community's capacity to respond to challenges. We can connect directly with local communities and not-for-profit organisations. And we're partnering more and more with local and state governments and beginning to partner more with the business sector. So I'd just like to, in terms of the G20, really just say, you know, foundations in a way are an untapped partner in so much of this work, you know, really on the ground, really supporting people with implementation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. That was very comprehensive. I think that's one other example of how within foundations we can actually find diversity on different activities and different types of support. I would like to hear from Red on the far side of the table. Red, same question, like what's the role of your constituency? What's the expectations that you have? I would like to go back and forth to see as well how the vulnerable countries relate to all this process. What do they do? What the challenges they face? So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Enrique. Konnichiwa. Red Constantino des, Philippine Caracamas.
I am Red Constantino from the Philippines.
First having me in this panel. It's an honor to be with prestigious colleagues. I have only 3 points to make, and they frame what I hope would be a contribution to the discussion concerning the G20. The first is by way of introduction. My work is concerned with and in support of what is a group that is called the V20 Group of Finance Ministers of Vulnerable Countries. So we work with governments. In particular, we work with finance ministers. The V20 was born out of its sister organization called the Climate Vulnerable Forum, which was founded in 2009. And the CVF decided at some point, composed of governments of some of the most vulnerable countries in the world, that it was going to be very important to take the climate crisis debate out of the prison of the UNFCCC negotiations. And so in 2015, October, we decided to establish the V20 Group of Finance Ministers precisely to put on the agenda of the top economic managers the issue of climate change in order to spur real action and accelerate change. In the beginning, the finance ministers were a bit bewildered as to why they were given an agenda that was so specific to what they normally thought would be an environmental issue. In a few months, they realized that this wasn't so, that the climate crisis presented to them an opportunity to protect the economy, to increase investments, and to reach out to partners to transform their own economies. And the work has been complex, but also very much rewarding, because when the finance ministers, the economic managers take hold of this issue, things change in a big way, and things pick up speed. It was also the right timing, because after establishing the V20 in October 2015 in Peru, 2 months later, Paris was gavelled. And CVF, the vulnerable countries, played a central role in getting the Paris Agreement agreed, because they had made it very, very clear that unless their demands of putting 1.5 as the threshold of safety in the Paris Agreement was met, that the vulnerable countries would walk away. And thus was born many concerted alliances ending in the Paris Agreement, and vulnerable countries happy, elated, but also nervous still, because an agreement is just an agreement if you don't implement it. The following year, within days after the election of the current US president, which gave a lot of delegates despair in Marrakesh, thinking that it would be a sad day for climate action, the vulnerable ministers came together and exhorted the entire body in Marrakesh, in the COP, to come together by issuing a commitment that all the vulnerable countries, before it was 20, it had grown already to 48, are committing to 100% renewable energy transition by 2050, and that they were prepared to do more, provided means of implementation, that they were prepared to do this earlier, and issued a clarion call asking for partners. Interestingly, one of the first countries, the first country that responded positively was China. When China said, consider us your partners, your goal is ours as well. Let us talk. And that dialogue continues to this day. The year after that, in 2017, the ministers also agreed to establish carbon pricing across all 48 markets, which is a bold move because they would have to do this within 10 years. And the year after that, the ministers issued a call reaching out to the International Monetary Fund and other financial regulators, asking the IMF for help to intervene in terms of putting climate change at the top of the agenda and ensuring that the risks associated with climate change are reflected fully in all the books. This is easier said than done, of course, because the IMF has this Article 4 consultation, which performs the role of like a checkup. If the IMF is the doctor, the country is the patient. Article 4 is the checkup. One example that I'd like to show is the Article 4 checkup of the IMF on Fiji, which concluded in February this year. Fiji is one of the most vulnerable countries in the world. And yet, the Article 4 outcome of the IMF in Fiji, in February this year, did not mention even once climate change. They could only say natural disasters. It's like a doctor approaching you to say, I'm going to check your entire body except your lungs. That needs to change. And we think this is an opportunity for collaboration across philanthropic organizations as well. Because it's not that the IMF is incompetent, but that they are also unfamiliar with how to do things this way. And an opportunity now is to place this on the table, to work together, in order for the IMF not only to place climate risk as part of their Article 4 process, but to also include what the V20 calls transition risks. Because as the economy transitions, many assets, as was said earlier, would strand. And important for groups like the IMF and the World Bank and other institutions, especially G20, to be telling financial regulators in hotspot regions like Southeast Asia that the transition will pose material risks to the macroeconomic fortunes of many vulnerable countries unless we ensure that the decline of fossils and the rise of renewables and efficiency is managed in a way that doesn't punish economies. And that was an important move as well, because for the V20, the difference between the advocacy of some countries that are maybe bigger is that the V20 is calling for ambition and also staking a claim into ensuring and committing that it will be part of the action. The ministers know that climate action is a means by which to pump prime the economy. Because in order to protect your economy in the face of climate change, you need to upgrade everything. Because you want to make everything more resilient, you have to upgrade infrastructure, food supply, supply chains, urban services, logistics, the energy sector. They need partners as well. And partnership is also what brings me to my second point, which is it's easier to talk about the crisis and solutions than to actually do it. On the one hand, it's admirable, and we hope that there are more companies, especially in Japan, follow the leadership of some of the biggest companies here, like Mizuho, Daiichi, Mitsubishi, the ones that divested early, including the Norwegian pension fund, away from coal, away from fossils. But it is also a fact that when you divest from coal or fossils, that money doesn't go to renewable energy. It can go to real estate, it can go to other non-productive sectors, which is the second point of what the V20 is trying to do. That point you see behind us on the screen, that the V20 has been creating different measures, instruments and facilities by which they can address what is actually preventing them from transitioning early. The cost of capital is preventing them from a full transition to protecting the economies, but also to increasing investments towards renewable energy. This is where the might, the expertise, the solid financial experience of countries like Japan are going to be really critical. The maturity of the capital markets in this country, insurance as well, is a tool that vulnerable countries really, really need at the moment. And a hand is reached out in order to ensure that measures like the accelerated finance mechanism for maximal resilience and 100% renewable energy and the sustainable insurance facility that have been put together by the finance ministers also gets support and encouragement from countries like Japan, China, and other members of the V20, of the G20. In closing, I guess my third point is that in the midst of a climate crisis, in the midst of a technological revolution, in the midst of the fact that we know, we sense it, and we know from data that has been presented, a lot of it today, that the ultimate landing zone will be an economy, a world filled with economies that have transitioned fully to renewable energy, to things that don't harm us. We know that that is going to be our ultimate landing zone. The big challenge is how quickly we get there. The speed by which we do this is going to be anchored on leadership. Unfortunately, in G20 right now, we have a deficit of the very thing that we require. And we hope that changes because the vulnerable countries are not asking for handouts, are not asking for grants. They're looking for partners, and they're looking for leaders as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fred. Definitely a different perspective and a different addition to this variety of stakeholders that have a key role to play. But not only a key role to play, and because as you were mentioning, I think that they're actually at the front line of the impacts. They are the ones that actually, it's not that they want just a partnership, they're actually thriving to survive. So thanks for that. And I would like to continue with Sang Lee, if I may. Please tell us a little bit more again, and what's the role that you play, and what's also how do you relate to the enabling this action, and how the G20, how it relates to the G20 as well? What expectations would you have?
Thank you for the moderator. Thank you very much for the organizing committee of this F20 high-level forum. Thank you very much for Stefan and the class invite SEE, Society of Entrepreneurs and Ecology Foundation, to be the steering committee member of F20. In my memory, in early 1990s, one retired Japanese old man called sorry, I'm sorry, my bad pronunciation. The old man from Japan retired, but planted trees in Inner Mongolia. Toyoma Seisei. I still remember his name because in 1990s, I was a PhD student at that time in the university. But this Japanese name gave me very encouraging information that for the environmental issues, it's no borders. And I still thank Toyoma to bring the friendship from Japan to China in the Mongolia, the desert of Engabei, to plant trees. 20 years later, we know those trees could be sold because of the carbon. They have a price. We know the carbon forest, new name for those trees. And 3 years ago, I joined Society of Entrepreneurs and Ecology Foundation that which have two parts. One is a society with about 1,000 Chinese entrepreneur members, all from different private business sectors. But also we have a foundation to raise money, 2/3 of our annual budget from general public to support Chinese environmental issues. We, in partnership with Alipay, Alibaba Group, to develop an online games we called Ant Forest. If you can use your Alipay to do online payment, and if you choose working or other public transportation, so you can also collect green credit. If you collect enough green credit, ICE, we can plant a real tree in Inner Mongolia for you. So in the past 3 years, the Alipay, together with SEE, and other partners, we planted about 100 million trees in Inner Mongolia already. And with the French International Bureau of Inspection, those trees fixed about 360,000 tons of carbon, CO2, with those carbon forests. SE, we are a group of nearly 1,000 Chinese entrepreneur members. Some of them, or 30% of them, originally come from real estate industry. So take this advantage. SE developed a program called Green Supply Chain Action in Real Estate Industry in China, launched in 2016. By using market mechanism or business model, the real estate enterprises purchasing power, the action promotes real estate industry to purchase from more environmental friendly suppliers and raise the environmental friendly and low carbon requirement to suppliers. So far, this achieved pollution reduction and the carbon reduction along the supply chains. The green, we call the China Green Supply Chain Program, united about 100 real estate companies. Most of them, they are SE members. And their annual sales of those companies nearly 2 trillion RMB, approximately 300 billion US dollar. And this year, SEE promotes the green procurement with the China Urban Realty Association to promote more than 150 real estate companies to implement a green procurement protocol we call whitelist, or means a suggested procurement list with more strict environmental protocols higher than national standard. We expect that this year's whitelist procurement amount will reach about 1 billion RMB this year. That covered about 7 sectors, including steel, cement, legal sales of timber, and others. One of this SE member of this China Real Estate Green Supply Chain Program called Lanxi Greenhouse. Lanxi is an active member of the action, and it's monitored with the support of our civil society NGO partners. It's monitored 185 supply chain companies on the app called Blue Map. So we learn from those companies what their the situation of their daily products and what the pollution data, if there's any. So that company and their will be removed from the supply whitelist. So won't be purchased their products. So this is what SE members doing. But meanwhile, as a public foundation, we also support local NGOs, grassroots NGOs. Currently, there are about 1,000 active registered environmental NGOs in China, and ICE we sponsored or supported over 550. So almost half of them got support from ICE Foundation. Most of these NGOs work on different environmental issues, but some of them did work on environment-related climate education and related works. So I believe that as a foundation, we can use a financial tool to guide those investments to support sustainable energy, renewable energy, and other green investment in different sectors. And with a unique status of SEE, and with its 1,000 members, we would like to create a more, we call it a business model in China to make the target of a carbon reduction.
Thank you very much. Clearly, there is, again, we're seeing like different varieties, different perspectives, and especially different type of work, sometimes in the ground. And I think that is super valuable, and it contributes to these different perspectives and different issues that we have in front of us. That's why I would like to pass now to Mr. Hideki from the Civil 20, who I would like to know a little bit more on how the Civil 20, another engagement group of the G20 process, engages and how it brings organizations from different backgrounds to keep track of most of the G20 agenda. Mr. Hideki?
Thank you very much, Enrique. I will be speaking Japanese since I was asked because the main target audience is Japanese. すみません、日本語で喋ります。
I shall speak in English. Once again, thank you for the introduction. I am Wakabayashi. In terms of policy, Enrique knows more than I do. He knows best because regarding this environmental group, he is the international coordinator about the global warming. So he asked me the question, but Enrique knows more than I do. But I shall talk about the C20 process, and from that perspective, C20 is one of the engagement group. Out of the 8 official groups, we are one. Our role is 7.5 billion of the global citizens' voices are to be communicated to the G20 governments. Those are because they are the most exposed. We are transmitting their voices and trying to have their voices be reflected as B20, L20, Y20, W20. But after all, you are a global citizen. You are one citizen. As an ordinary citizen for this generation, you hand over this planet to the next generation. With that sense, the voices are collected, policies are communicated, and requesting that the policies be reflected. That is our role. And therefore, the C20 means that we have working groups dealing with all the agendas. We have 11 working groups to cover all the topics covered by G20. We cover extensive areas, and this is one of our policy pack. And to Prime Minister Abe, who is the President, Chair, we handed this to the Prime Minister. Environment is linked to so many social issues. It's not only global warming or environment. Solution is not meaningful just focusing only on one area like anti-corruption, gender, equality, infrastructure, health, promotion, education, international financial system, all are incorporated because they are all linked to global environment. I don't think there could be any more comprehensive policy. Therefore, this has to be communicated to the G20 leaders and be implemented. On top of that, there are 3 perspectives I would like to introduce. First of all, climate justice. SDG Sustainable Development Goals, we only have 10 years left, only 10 years, and there are so many challenges that we have to overcome. Actions should have been implemented. We are late. About this climate crisis, on the one hand, it's a human rights crisis as well, because the most vulnerable, their human rights have to be protected, actions have to be implemented now. SDGs, leave no one behind. That is the slogan attached to SDGs. The most exposed, the most vulnerable should be dealt with first. Put the last first. Put the last first. The most weak should be dealt with first. In that meaning, justice is most important. That is embodied in this slogan. Another important point. What has not been talked much is with the space of the civic society. What I mean is that all citizens can engage, talk, act freely, and that civic space is shrinking across the world. You see the demonstrations in Hong Kong. That is deeply related to global warming. Today I represent NGO, but there are people from Venezuela, and they are demanding something be done because there are so many crises in Venezuela, and I have heard about the cry for support. G20 accounts for 85% of the global GDP, but according to Civicus, out of the G20, surprisingly, 79% of the population is making the civic society space smaller. Being narrow is the judgment. In the case of Japan, our civic society space is becoming smaller. There must be a space where ordinary citizens can talk freely, and that we have the freedom to make requests with the government. Without that freedom, nothing will advance. If there is a free, active civil activity, everybody will be paying attention to social issues, and people will try to do whatever they can. That will lead to the stability of the region. We are going the other way around. Mass consumption, environment destroyed, lots of issues, people are poor, and civic society space shrinking. It's a vicious cycle. It has to be converted into a virtuous, good cycle. So in the area of global warming, we have to go back to the origin that we need a bigger space for civic society to be free. And Japan is no exception. The freedom of media in Japan is declining in ranking. In terms of gender gap, Japan is the lowest amongst the ranked countries. So for overall rights, we must be more serious, which will lead to the advancement of global environmental issue. And that perspective is important for the civic society, and this is incorporated into our policy pack. About the challenges, I shall just highlight 2 or 3. What we are asserting is no more commitment is needed. As the host country, they are working on documenting, writing, the leaders communicate, and it has always been repeated, just writing and talking, that was all, and no action taken. Our largest demand for this year's G20 is action, please, no more commitment, no more communique. On top of that, the 1.5 degrees goal of the Paris Accord in a consistent way, the NDC, there must be stronger ambition, or subsidies to fossil fuel must be phased out, that they must be stronger phasing out. In 2009, there was the Pittsburgh summit, and this is the 10th anniversary. At Pittsburgh, they have agreed to phasing out already. 10 years ago, it was agreed, but no action. So because it is the 10th anniversary, once again, we are demanding the subsidies to fossil be phased out, and the subsidies should be completely eliminated by 2025 or make the roadmap by 2020. After all, low-carbon infrastructure is required. It must be inclusive, eco-friendly. It must be climate resilient. That is the requirement of infrastructure. So investment in fossil fuel is a harm to the society. It generates a large amount of GHG, and a large amount of emitted gas would lock in. This is also our message. We have included a lot of our messages, but it's related to human rights and climate crisis. They are adjacent, interlinked, intertwined matters. So not only this year's G20, but we will continue our message sending from next year and onwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hideki, for that perspective and for highlighting the large group of civil society that engages in the G20, and not only those from G20 countries, which is very important. And I think that the role that you play at the Civil 20, and I had the pleasure to participate and engage with you, I think that's really remarkable. Finally, I would like to pass the word to Lee Hongpen from the Children Investment Fund Foundation. Same question to you, and from the philanthropy side, what role do we play? What kind of work do we do to enable the action?
Thank you very much, Enric. This has been a long day. I hope you all still have some energy left. So I will try to make my points short. So three things I want to say here. Firstly, who we are, very brief introduction about ourselves. Two, what are the largest challenges we are facing, in my view. Thirdly, what are the three things I think we have to do? Who we are. So I'm coming from Children Investment Fund Foundation. So we are a private philanthropic foundation registered in the UK. Now we have regional offices in China, India, Kenya, and Ethiopia. So we are the largest private foundation in the world, specifically focusing on improving children's lives. So currently, every year, we are supporting around 250 million US dollar programs all around the world. Around 2/3 of the portfolio is about children's health, children's nutrition, education, and child protection. We have 1/3 of the portfolio is about addressing climate change, since we all know climate change is the largest threat to our children. So our climate portfolio looking at energy transition, sustainable cities, improving air quality, decarbonize industries and land use. We've been working in Europe, in China, in Southeast Asia, in India, and Latin America. So last year, in September, during the Global Climate Action Summit in San Francisco, our founder actually, while he was calling for more philanthropy to put more resources to address climate change, he also made a public commitment on behalf of himself and the CIF to increase our support on addressing climate change to 100 million US dollar a year for the next 5 years. Last thing I want to mention ourselves. So we have a quite a large endowment. So our endowment investment have a climate-friendly standard. For example, we are not investing any company in the world if your income has more than 10% come from fossil fuel. So we will not invest. So what's the largest challenge we are facing? I want to echo previous speakers today. I think the major challenge we are facing is globally, we lack a political will to tackle climate change. And if you go to local level, climate change is actually not always on the priority list. So as introduced today by other speaker, so according to IPCC, so we only have just 11 years to make the massive and necessary change to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. beyond this time, even half a degree increase will significantly worsen the lives of hundreds of millions of people. So the current commitments from countries are far away to secure a 1.5 degree future. Then we need much stronger political will to address this urgency. So there are many cities who have been doing fantastic things to achieve low carbon transition, like Tokyo, we heard just now. But we all have to agree that since the local governments have the responsibility to grow economy, to create jobs for people, and in many cases, low carbon action are not properly integrated and prioritized by cities. So it's particularly true for cities whose economy are heavily relying on, for example, coal mining industry or other coal consumption-based industries. And they haven't seen the alternative. So in addition to encouraging and supporting all the pioneers, so we have to take care of all these who have been left behind. So I want to highlight three things I think is very important. The first one, raise ambition. So we know next 18 months are critically important. So ahead of COP26 of the United Nations Climate Change Convention in November 2020, countries will submit their updated NDCs and long-term strategies to meet the Paris commitment. And the month before, actually, in October 2020, China will host the COP15 for UN Convention on Biodiversity, where countries will review the framework to address nature's dangerous decline. Then obviously, G20 is coming here. Then this September, we have UN Climate Summit in New York. So it would be great if we can encourage China and the European host of Climate COP26 to work together, ensuring the interlinked biodiversity and the climate emergency are considered together. 2020 could be the year we raise ambition to deliver a new deal for the nature and for humanity. Secondly, how to green the investment along the Belt and Road Initiative. So the Belt and Road Initiative involves countries across Asia, Europe, Africa, Middle East, and the Americas. So the estimated cumulative investment is between US $4 trillion to $8 trillion. So we have to work with both the demand side, which is the recipient countries, but also the supply side, China, to promote a green and low carbon BRI. We also need to involve countries like Japan here, like US and the European countries, to collaborate and share best practice and the standard. So lastly, I want to mention how we can better use all the disruptive technologies. Technology obviously play a very important role here. I want to see two examples. The first one, electric vehicles. So electric vehicles not only transforming the transport sector, but also could play the storage role for the high renewable penetration energy system in the future. So currently, charging infrastructure is a bottleneck. So we are working with our partners in China to explore solutions. We hope it can be shared very quickly with many other countries. So another area we are working on is hyperlocal air quality monitoring technologies. In London, in Chinese cities, we are considering to expand to Indian cities. The hyperlocal data, air quality data, can trigger more actions from people and also to support and help the government to increase enforcement of the environmental regulations. I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that intervention. I think with that, we complete a really wide variety of different perspectives and different roles in relation to the implementation of the Paris Agreement, the raise of ambition, and the achievement of the 2030 agenda. So now I would like to go back to you with just one more question. Some of you already address it in your statements, but here, F20 gathers a number of foundations around the world, mostly from G20 countries. And we have seen that there is a diversity of these foundations. Like Catherine, you just show us like a wide variety of projects that you develop in different perspectives with this toolbox that you mentioned. Sang Lee, you just talk about different partnerships and different implementation projects, and Lee, you just outline a different, also like different endowments and different investments and different ways of supporting and having transformative changes. So it would be great to have from you, and of course, and I think most importantly, from Renato and from Hideki, from all your perspectives, what this group of foundations, what does the philanthropy would need to do in the upcoming years to leverage all this that we have seen during the course of the day? We have heard about the science, we have heard about the needs, the money, the investments, the infrastructure. So it could be just thoughts, of course. It's not, I wouldn't expect, if you do have the solution, please go ahead, that would be amazing. But it would be good to have different perspectives of what the foundations, what the philanthropy could actually do to align the resources, what they can do to leverage what we have already in place, to bring more people into the table, to make the movements stronger, and to actually, and in the end, to get that climate action that we need.
A couple of thoughts.
I would just be quick. We only have 17 minutes, so I ask you to be brief in your responses.
This is going to be short. First of all, there are networks of foundations all around the world, which I think we could really activate a lot more. There's community foundation networks and private family networks and everywhere. I mean, corporate foundation. I mean, there's so many. If we all actually put a climate lens over all our work, that would be quite a massive change. And I think more and more we see ourselves as social investors, not just as charitable grant makers, so more strategic and using our assets for impact investment or mission-related investment as well as grants. So I think there's more in that area too.
Excellent.
Yeah, I still remember in 2007, 12 years ago, I was working with another foundation, Conservation International. We host a climate education program in China during 1 month in Beijing Music Hall. We have a carbon neutral program. In 1 month, we calculated the carbon emission of that 1 month musical hall and activities. So we plant carbon trees in panda reserve. At that time, we only generated about 18 tons in 1 month with about 2,000 participants of that 1 month music hall activities. But now, in 3 years, we generated about 360,000 tons with about 500 million people involved in that ant forest APP games. So I think as a foundation, and we can have a different access to our supporters, our donors, and general public, and also even influence have impact on the policymakers. So we have different roles. We need to use different roles and different channels to reach those policymakers to make a stronger commitment to implement Paris Agreement. Not only in China, India, but also even in US, we have a lot of partners there working hard. Like last year when we were in the climate summit in San Francisco, a lot of U.S. foundations take actions together with policymakers and the general public to push to make these things happen forward.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. I want to see three things or three roles the foundation could play. The first one is we need to invite much more foundations to join this fight. I mean, if you look at the scale of the challenge we are facing, but actually that's only a very small percentage of the global financial money looking at climate. So we need to invite more foundations. How to do that? I think, firstly, our climate community need further, sharpen our strategy. Then you can sell your idea to new founders. You need to ensure they have confidence to put resources in. And second thing I think very important is to really work with local philanthropy, especially in emerging economies. There are growing philanthropies in China, in India, in many other emerging economies. How to work with new philanthropies. Currently, many of them are mostly focusing on local issue, for example. The second thing I think is really about how to grow the field. Especially our NGO partners, think tank partners. We need to grow our community. We need to deploy more resources to the front line, to give the frontline partners more support, and to ensure we have more local ownership to make the real change. The last thing I want to see, we need to further grow our partnership with government and with business. We need to understand where are the gaps stopping people to make the change. Then we can find a way to address the gap and hopefully find a way to move forward together. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Yes, this is C20 again. C20. In terms of the nature of engagement group, we can network and link different engagement groups. In a sense, C20 issuing statements or convene other organizations, we have that opportunity, and we have been doing that. So going forward, we would like to emphasize our engagement with foundations like you. So our expectation is, of course, in terms of funding, we have a big expectation, but the think tank role is what we also have a big expectation. So it could be a very good partnership between C20 and F20. So we hope that the gaps that we suffer can be filled by you. In Japan, C20 for democracy, human rights, climate actions, we have to say that we do not have enough foundations in Japan who are committed to this area. C20 itself is supported by non-Japanese foundations, I have to admit. But the preparatory meetings in Japan, we had the chair and the Sasaka Peace Foundation was supported, so we managed to host that meeting in Japan. So we are managing to cooperate in the policies with the support of many partners. Thank you.
Thank you. Brett?
Thank you. I guess I would have two very important things. For the foundations, one, stay the course. We're talking about climate mostly because V20 is about the climate issue. But the G20 group of countries is more than just climate. And there's a lot of issues that are intrinsic to development that require G20 leadership as well. And the more that the foundations can stay the course, support the groups that are working on development issues, And if you can give more, the better. Because G20 ultimately will have to decide, and we will have to remind them again and again, how do you spell G20? Is it with a capital G or a small g? Are you a gorilla economy or are you goldfish? Are you big or are you small? Right now they're trying to be small. We shouldn't allow that. The second part is for the foundations, be bold. In the middle of the greatest crisis that we're facing, we need to test new approaches. And my appeal also is to see other flanks, not just what is obvious, big emitters. The V20 group of countries provide an actionable agenda that is fixable, that doesn't also require a clash that we are all trying to avoid. For instance, some of the facilities that we're trying to put together have to deal with cost of capital that is intrinsic to the triple burden that vulnerable countries are made to carry. They're vulnerable, and because they're vulnerable, the cost of capital is greater, which means when they're hit, their ability to get financing becomes even more expensive, all because of a problem that they did not have anything to do with, or very little to do with. And so we're not even discussing V20 in terms of civil society, but what happens to the micro, small, and medium enterprises that are the lifeblood of those economies in Guatemala, in Sri Lanka, in Bangladesh, in Philippines, in Ethiopia. Their ability to gain financing, to protect their economies, to allow investments to thrive, presents an opportunity for the big economies, the gorilla economies, who are facing their own challenges, to consider markets that are also probably going to provide them solutions. V20 countries, 48 in all, represent over a billion people in population. And together the emissions are bigger than Russia. So the space for action, the actionable agenda is pretty big. And so the foundations need to be bold, but also bold in the sense of the biggest challenge, which is we're really looking at signals constantly that we are moving towards this pathway. Businesses demand it, citizens demand it. Certainly, the foundation should support that as well.
Thank you very much. So this panel has been amazing in terms of the diversity of work that you do, the different perspectives that you brought, and I'm very grateful and honored that I facilitated this. It's amazing how I basically did the same question to these 5 different people, and their questions, the responses were very different and very enriching, I believe. It's the one thing that I would take and would add into this suggestions, and I think, Catherine, you mentioned this, is about the risk. Like the foundations have that opportunity that they can actually take some risk and prove that actually things can happen, to actually give the assurance to others to actually follow. So I think that is something that also reflects that bold steps that they can take, that actually ensuring that they can show that there are ways that can be done and that actually can be supported, and keeping in mind the targets that we need, the action that needs to happen. I really like the idea of making the movement growing includes to make those steps bolder, being innovative, taking transformative ideas. Today, Sven was talking about that the projections they made were done with the current technologies, or technologies that were in the way of developing. There is plenty of technology we don't know that it's going to be in 2040 or in 2045. So I always say that 10 years ago, we barely have the first smartphones, right? So imagine what could be in the next 10 years or next 20 years, which is before 2050 still. So, and I think that's where these opportunities for the foundations are, to actually invest in those innovations. Not only technology, could be ideas, could be practices, many things, or just going back to our roots and see what is there, because that's actually where we didn't have this problem as well. So I think that there are a number of things that could actually be taken from this panel, and I think that the diversity that we had here, and the diversity that lays in the F20 as well, I think is well reflected in this panel as well. Like, we have like large foundations, we have small foundations, organizations that actually address, connects, enable, and I think that here we have seen a lot of opportunities to continue growing this collaboration, reinforcing the fact that foundations have a role to play, that those steps need to be bold, and they could be enablers for others that are in the front lines to actually address and deal with the worst impacts of climate change. It's only 3 minutes ahead of time, and I think that people would appreciate that we close the panel here. So I want to thank you all for this beautiful panel that we had. Please give them a huge applause for them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Enrique. Thanks for your interventions. Quite dense indeed and enriching, as you said. So we will be closing this very, very comprehensive day in the next couple of minutes before we go to our reception. So I invite Thomas Karberger and our chair from the F20 group, Klaus Mieke, to join the stage, as well as Mika Obayashi from the Renewable Energy Institute, to just provide a few closing remarks. I stay here?
We should start. Mika, with us here?
So, busy day, as we said, and I saw you during the day taking notes here and there. What's the essence of those notes, Thomas?
I think we have had a great day, and I'm very grateful to all the presenters who have contributed. But I kept reminding myself that despite it being a wonderful meeting, this is only a very small meeting in relation to the size of the issue we have been discussing. We got a lot of good presentations showing that a transition into a system that will not contribute to climate change is technically as well as economically not only possible, but profitable. But no one of us can do this by ourselves, but we can all contribute with what little we can do, each of us. And we tend to see people on stage and see them as very important. But I would like to say that all of you who have spent the day with us will also have to contribute if we are to succeed. So I'm very grateful that you're here, but also hope that having been here will make you do something. No one can do everything, but everyone can do something to speed up this development that need to be accelerated. So thank you all for being here.
Thanks, Thomas. So I just use this. Maybe, Mika, would you just like to share a few observations from your end?
今朝から
From this morning, we've been spending a day talking about climate change or social vulnerability. There are numerous challenges, and yet there are also opportunities. So once again, I think we were able to reconfirm that. There was a flash news just a minute ago in Japan this afternoon. In the Strait of Hormuz, 2 tankers were attacked and they are damaged. And the cargo was fossil fuel destined for Japan. And the Ministry of METI made an announcement that they will have discussions about energy supply, and oil prices around the world is going up. Until when do we have to rely on such unsecure, unstable energy sources? And the Japanese NRC has not yet established security measures against terrorism in Japanese nuclear power plants. And if they are unable to build such a facility, they will stop the operation. There are 9 nuclear power plants that has resumed operation after Fukushima. And all 9 of them do not have safety measures in place. And the power companies with nuclear power plants, if nuclear power plants are to be suspended, tariff needs to be increased, buying fossil fuel, and they have to burn more fossil fuel. Until when do we have to rely ourselves on such unstable sources? It is very clear to me that there's future for us is only with renewable energy, and we were able to confirm that in today's meeting. And Hengroja-san from Hawaii said that in 2045, 100% renewable, being able to shift towards 100% renewable energy. This is what we would need to achieve.
Klaus, your final remarks.
Well, it was a day of encouragement, really. I'm enthusiastic for all the perspectives, for all the good ideas, mainly in the last round. It was very important for me to hear. And it gives us speed somehow and encouragement to invite others to join F20. You see the carpet with the logos. Some of you can easily come to the carpet of the foundations who are in the room, who are not yet there, but we will try and do our best with philanthropists in the world and foundations in the world to get this grouping to a more powerful one in the next future. We recognize today it's needed to have them, and in this bridging function between business, with think tanks, with civil society, and good entrance to the political arena, that helps a lot. We are not an engagement group, no, not an official engagement group, but in this bridging situation, I think we can do a lot in the future. We recognize today, and that is also important for us as the platform Foundations 20, that the next year really is a crucial one. And we have to bring forces together, and we have specific days and activities during the year, but we have to bring up more ambition. I think that is very important, and all the foundations we have here in an international network have to do their homework in their specific countries to raise the ambition in the NDCs of the countries. And another last point from my side, we need transformative alliances, partnerships between countries, but we need them also between actors from NGOs, from business, from foundations worldwide to support what should happen in these alliances of ambition between countries. And there we can have a positive role as part of the solution, of the solutions. There is not only one, we learned also today. And we can do it and we should do it. If we wait too long, we have not only a crisis, but we have really lost the game. Thank you so much, and a huge thank you to our partner foundation, represented by you, Mika. You and your team, you did a wonderful job. It was a long day of preparation and bringing all this together, and it worked well. It worked more than well. It was super. Thank you so much, and a big applause to the team of REI and all those who supported.
I think we should invite. You have to clap again. Just 1 second. We have to just include into our thank you the team of F20, Martin, Mosca, and Aria. And I can also say thank you. It was a great collaboration. Okay. Now I think we have the reception, and you're invited to join us and to continue our conversations. Have a good day. Thank you.
それではご登壇者の方を大きな拍手で
Let us see them off with a big round of applause. Thank you so very much.